Today we'll take a look at 50 facts about clone special forces of the Star Wars universe. We'll look at units like the ARC Trooper, Republic Commandos, but also at lesser known clone special forces. But also at their weaponry, their missions, and more. When you think of clone special forces, two units probably immediately come to mind for many of you. The Republic Commandos, also called Clone Commandos, or the ARC Troopers. In canon we know that both ARCs and Clone Commandos were genetically normal clones who received special training for their new roles. When it came to armor and equipment, the ARCs often had free choice on their missions. However, some pieces of equipment were readily used by many ARCs. One of these weapons was the Westar M5 blaster rifle. This was very effective at medium ranges, had a large magazine size, and could fire quickly and accurately. But perhaps most importantly, it packed a punch. So much that it could easily shoot through the armor of an AAT tank. While the ARCs operated alone, the Republic Commandos were bred directly into small groups. They grew up in groups of 4 from birth and were to be deployed in these groups of 4 later on. The area of operation of the Clone Commandos could essentially be the same as that of the ARCs. Which of the two units was deployed primarily depended on which units were available and whether the mission was to be carried out by a single individual or by a small group. The Republic Commandos also received special training, of course. What's also interesting about them is that each member of such a commando squad specialized in their own area. This means that in a 4-man squad, there could be a close combat expert, an explosive expert, a slicer, or even a good driver or pilot. We don't have any real information on this, but it could be that the individual members of the commando squads were even better in their respective fields than the ARC Troopers, as they could concentrate fully on their speciality, while ARCs had to be good at everything. ARC Troopers themselves, as already mentioned, had free choice regarding their armor and equipment on their missions. The Republic Commandos weren't quite as free, but this was also due to the fact that they were given their own set of armor. The exclusive Katarn Commando armor, which only the Republic Commandos were allowed to use. And this Katarn Commando armor was really good. Not only was the armor itself better armored than the Phase 1 or 2 armor of the clones, it was also equipped with a personal shield. The Commandos had the technology that was usually installed in spaceships or tanks in their own armor, allowing them to take significantly more damage than any other clone units. In addition, a vibroblade was built into the armor on the wrist, which meant the Commandos always had a very capable close combat weapon at hand. If we look at the armament of the Republic Commandos, this was also specially designed for the Commandos themselves. Their main armament consisted of a DC-15S blaster pistol and a DC-17M blaster rifle. The DC-17M is particularly interesting, because it was a modular blaster rifle. The rifle itself could fire regular blaster bolts, but also had 2 additional firing modes. Firstly, such DC-17Ms could be converted into sniper rifles. A telescopic sight could be attached to them, as well as a new magazine that distributed ammunition differently. Instead of using a small amount of gas for a relatively large number of shots, this mode drew a large amount of gas from the magazine per shot, allowing it to produce few but very powerful blaster bolts. The third firing mode was that of a grenade launcher. A grenade launcher attachment could be attached to the front of the DC-17M, firing grenades that could both penetrate tank armor and destroy groups of infantry. After some time, a 4th variant was added to the DC-17M, the Pulse Energy Projectile, which could disable organic beings without killing them. Naturally, it was a suitable tool for missions in which targets were to be abducted and interrogated. As for numbers, we know from legends that there were initially 10,000 of these commandos, a large portion of whom were deployed directly to Geonosis. Since Geonosis was their first deployment, and the Republic had severely underestimated the Separatists, almost half of them were wiped out right there on Geonosis. But the Republic had more specialized clone troopers to offer, like the ARF Troopers. Unfortunately, we don't have a great deal about these advanced recon force troopers. However, they definitely received special training and were given specially adapted armor. Their scope of duties was also similar to that of the ARCs. While ARCs primarily operated behind enemy lines, mostly to eliminate targets, ARF Troopers specialized entirely in reconnaissance, for Jedi generals and other high-ranking officers. ARF Troopers focused on scouting areas undetected in order to provide their superiors with the best possible information about the enemy. While the ARFs attempted to operate quietly and unnoticed, the Clone Blaze Troopers were the exact opposite. They were troopers of a very special kind. Similar to the Clone Commandos, they also had their own unique armor. This Blaze armor, however, was also a caliber of its own, because these Clone Blaze troops were deployed on the front lines, directly on the front lines. Their heavy armor was not only armored against fire, but was also made heat resistant. Their primary weapon was a flamethrower attached to their right forearm. With this flamethrower, they were supposed to cut through rows of enemy battle droids and to clear battlefield debris. Since they were effectively melee units, they naturally needed additional equipment to survive. Of course, there were clone melee units that could survive their missions well, but those were equipped with light armor and designed to operate undetected. The Clone Blaze Troopers with their huge bulky armor couldn't handle that. That's why they were also equipped with a jetpack that could carry them quickly into and out of the battle. To protect the Republic fleet, there were the Clone Marines. They were stationed on ships and space stations and specially trained to fight in tight situations, but also in space. So it sometimes happened that Clone Marines were not only used to defend ships, but were also sent into combat offensively to board other ships. For these types of missions, the Clone Marines were equipped with space armor as well as their own jetpacks. We've already mentioned that both the ARC and ARF Troopers were used for reconnaissance. The problem with these two units, however, was that they could only remain undetected as long as they weren't seen. Because as soon as they were seen, it was clear they were clones. Even without their armor, they couldn't really go undercover, since the entire galaxy quickly knew what the clones looked like. This problem was supposed to be solved with the Clone Shadow Troopers. They were the best of the best when it came to covert operations. Of course, they were still clones who couldn't change their faces. However, their armor was designed in such a way that additional armor could be easily attached, making it very easy for these troops to hide their armor and pass as mercenaries, for example. This meant that these Clone Shadow Troopers couldn't simply scout areas and remain undetected, as long as they weren't seen. This allowed them to operate directly under the enemy's nose without being noticed. The clones for covert operations, or Covert Ops clones, also worked, as their name suggested, completely in public. No undercover, of course. However, their work was more morally ambiguous than that of most of other clones. That's why these Covert Ops clones consisted only of clones who had already proven on the battlefield that they would show no mercy. These selected clones were then trained by null arcs and unleashed on their targets, on other clones. Because the thing was, over the course of the Clone Wars, more than a small number of clones questioned the meaning of their lives. Clones had been bred as machines to fight for the Republic, and that was all they lived for. But some clones saw things differently. They wanted more in their lives than constant combat, which is why they deserted. Some of them to live a quiet life, perhaps to start a family. Some also wanted to help the enemy, the Separatists. And precisely such clones were the main targets of the Covert Ops clones. They ensured that any clone who deserted wouldn't be able to enjoy their new life for long. Speaking of clone special forces and deserters, in Legends there was even an ARC Trooper who deserted from Kamino and made his way to Mandalore. He gathered Mandalorians around him, secured his own battle droids of his own design from the Separatists, and led the Mandalorians into war against the Republic as the new Mandalore. There were even clone special forces that fought with lances on speeder bikes, similar to knights with lances on horses. These clone lance troops are in principle quite easy to explain. They had a speeder bike and an energy lance with which they stabbed their enemies. These clone troopers were designed to be the first to charge into the separatist droid armies, opening up the front line and then making room for the rest of the clone army. Similar to the Lancers, the clone assassins were also close combat troops. These assassins were armed with 2 vibroblades attached to their forearms. To be effective, the assassins were trained in one of the toughest forms of combat, Terras Kasi, not only by regular instructors, but also by Jedi Padawans. In practice battles, these assassins could learn how to fight even against such powerful opponents as the Jedi. This greatly improved their speed in combat and even helped them resist mind tricks later on. What was quite tragic for the Jedi, as the Republic army originally wouldn't have had these clone assassins. Palpatine had secretly commissioned these assassins from the Kaminoans, with the ulterior motive of being able to use them later against the Jedi. And that's exactly what these assassins did very successfully in Legends. While these lance troops and clone assassins were stirring up trouble on the front lines with their speeder bikes, the Republic had also clones that could be sent into enemy territory directly, the paratroopers. These were usually dropped from dropships or directly from capital ships and then parachuted behind enemy lines. Unfortunately, we don't really know much about these troopers. If you enjoyed the video, it would mean a lot to me if you'd consider subscribing. And if you want to learn more about the clone army in general, watch the 50 facts video about them, linked here in the end card.